Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Maple Grove Scripture Reading Podcast. Today's reading is going to take us through Genesis chapters 43 through 45. Yesterday, we saw Joseph finally get out of prison after a couple of years to help interpret two dreams that Pharaoh had, which both were pointing to 7 years where everything was going to be in abundance. The food would be in abundance. But then it was going to be followed by 7 years of famine. Joseph was placed in charge of preparing for the famine, and he stored up a whole lot of grain over those 7 years of abundance in order to prepare for the famine that would come afterwards. And then he would sell that grain from the storehouses during the famine. Now, this famine is also in Canaan, and we see Jacob send his other sons, Joseph's brothers, to buy grain from Egypt. Well, all of his sons except for one, and that's Benjamin. And we see that they unknowingly cross paths with Joseph while they're there. Now, Joseph recognizes them, but he doesn't tell them. Instead, he says that they're spies. And he says that he's not going to be convinced otherwise unless they bring their other brother to him. Now, Simeon is ending up staying as basically collateral. And the other brothers, they go home. They tell Jacob what's happened, who says there is absolutely no way that he is going to send Benjamin to Egypt. And so we pick up the story in chapter 43, which is about 1 year later, 1 year or so. And Jacob, his sons, they had eaten all of the grain that they had brought home. And so Jacob tells them, well, they got to go back to Egypt to buy some more. But then Judah reminds Jacob of what Joseph had said, that they needed, if they were going to go back, they needed to bring Benjamin with them. Now, Jacob doesn't want to send him, but Judah eventually convinces him, saying that I'm going to protect Benjamin. Nothing is going to happen to him. And so Jacob eventually relents because they probably need the food. They need the grain. Now, they travel back to Egypt with Benjamin, and Joseph sees them, and he has a meal prepared for them, and they think they're having this meal because of the silver that they found in their bags the last time. Remember, they brought silver to buy the grain and everything, but then Joseph secretly had it put back, which they didn't discover until they were on the way back home. So they're afraid that they're going to have retribution against them. And so they actually come clean to Joseph's steward, who tells them, it's okay. That was the work of your God who did that. So at the meal, Joseph asks them about their father and if he's still alive, which they say yes, which probably would have been an interesting conversation, but maybe it's also just some conversation they were having. So we go to chapter 44, and after the meal, Joseph tells his steward to fill their bags full of grain. But then he's also got this plan. He has them put his silver cup into Benjamin's bag. And then he decides he's going to send his steward out after them, after they had gone, and say that they had stolen this cup. The steward does this, and he catches up with the brothers and tells them, you've stolen my master's cup. What have you done? And the brothers say they hadn't done anything like this. And if the steward looks and he finds the cup, then that person who has the cup will die, and the rest will become his master's slaves. Now, the steward, I think he thinks this is kind of silly, so he alters the deal a little bit, and he says that whoever has it is actually just going to become a slave, and then the others will be able to leave and go home. And of course, he does find the cup in Benjamin's grain bag. So they all head back to go before Joseph, and he says that only Benjamin would have to become a slave, and the others were free to leave. Now, Judah, after his promise to Jacob, he talks to Joseph alone, and he tells him the promise that he's made, and he pleads with Joseph that he doesn't take Benjamin. We move to chapter 45, where Joseph sends all the Egyptians out of the room, and he weeps uncontrollably in front of his brothers. And then he reveals himself to his brothers as Joseph. And they're rightfully a little worried, a little confused, but he tells them not to be distressed, not to be angry with themselves for selling him, because he attributes that to the Lord. in order that lives would be saved. He wants them to bring Jacob and to return to Egypt to live in this land called Goshen so that he could take care of them through the famine. And word gets to Pharaoh about what's happened, and Pharaoh was pleased, and he instructed them to go back and to return with their father Jacob. And they do that. They tell Jacob that Joseph is alive, and he is stunned at first. He doesn't believe them, but eventually they convince him. And we get to the end of the chapter with Jacob saying that he plans to go and see his son Joseph before he dies. And as we finish up our reading today, I just want to point out a couple of things, really just one thing that I think that we've seen throughout this story of Joseph, and that is the providence of God. Joseph thinks through everything that has happened to him, being sold into slavery, being wrongfully accused of something, being put into prison, being forgotten. He sees all of this as God working through him in order to save many, many lives. I mean, think about this. Had Joseph not been there to interpret the dreams of the cupbearer, then the cupbearer would not have been able to tell Pharaoh about him, and then Pharaoh would not have known that a famine was even coming, and he would not have placed Joseph in charge to store up grain during the plentiful harvests. God worked through evil intent, because I think that's the only way that you can look at what the brothers did to him, that it was evil intent. But God worked through that for good. He took something evil and brought good out of it, saving many lives. Okay, that's where we're going to wrap it up for today. Tomorrow we're going to find out what happens when Jacob makes his journey to Egypt. But until then, just want to thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow. God bless. So long.